the important thing to take away from this set of slides is that young people think like their mothers think, more or less. Well, in some cases. So what I've done is the orange bars are basically the responses for young people whose mothers agreed with the statement, and the blue bar is the responses for mothers or for young people whose mothers did not. So we said, do you think unemployment benefits are too low and cause hardship, or do you think they're too high and reduce people's incentives to work? For young people whose mothers believe that unemployment benefits are too low, well, more than half of them also believe that unemployment benefits are too low when they're asked independently. For young people whose mothers do not agree with that, who do not agree with that statement, only about 30% of youth will say, yep, I think they're too low, even though their mothers have disagreed. Okay? These differences, again, are significant with the exception of this one about parental education. So we asked a bunch of questions about what do you think is important to get ahead in life? How important do you think the following things are? Parental education, your own education, having a job, ambition, coming from a wealthy family background. Okay? And basically what you take away from this is that young people really do share their mother's views about the level of unemployment benefits and whether it's the government's responsibility to look after the unemployed or whether that's really better placed with individuals and their families. This graph basically takes that and then adds an additional dimension, which is, well, what's the effect of having grown up in income support? Okay? So these are the differences in the means or the differences in the proportion agreeing with statements by the family's welfare history. So what we've done is we simply said, okay, take the probability that those on welfare agree, subtract off the probability that those on no welfare agree. And we've graphed this for youth and mothers. Okay? So the way to interpret this, let's just start on the far, what hand is this? Left. Basically, the orange bar is for youth. And what that says is that young people who grow up in families on income support are about 10 percentage points more likely to think that unemployment benefits are too low than are young people who don't. So the difference between for kids growing up on income support versus not makes you about 10 percentage points more likely to agree with that statement. For the mothers, the difference in mothers' responses is about twice as large. Okay? And so what you take away from that is that income support history matters. It matters more for what mothers think than what for youth think. Okay? So there's some sort of reduction in the intensity of the welfare effect across the generations. Okay? The other thing to take away is that those four bars on the sort of right side of the page, just all over the map. Okay? What that's telling you is that the pattern or the effect of welfare history for young people and their mothers isn't even going in the same direction. For young people growing up on income support, they are actually more likely to sort of believe that education is important for getting ahead, right? Okay, so what's the takeaway story? Young people's attitudes are linked to those of their mothers. And income support does affect the attitudes of young people. Okay? So that's kind of a necessary condition for a welfare culture, that somehow the welfare experience is affecting people's attitudes about working versus welfare. Some of the link appears to us to be causal. We can't make it all go away. Right? At the same time, what we haven't done is actually establish that these attitudes are important for the kinds of behaviors that you would be interested in. You don't get welfare in Australia by going down to Centrelink and saying, I have a bad attitude. At least not yet. Okay? You go down to Centrelink and you say, well, I'm not doing well in school, or I'm unemployed, or if I had this baby. So what we need to now do is establish that, in fact, even if there is a bit of a causal link in shifting those attitudes, that, in fact, that change in attitude is enough to actually change behavior in a way that matters. In other words, to push them on the income support. Okay, so you have to stay tuned on this one. All right, what do we do now? Basically, I think the challenges are that I've only showed you 3 of probably 300 tables. And in just about every single figure I would have shown you, you would have seen the kinds of gaps. So we are actually seeing gaps in just absolutely everything we measured, from what kinds of activities they did after school, every health thing that we measured, every education thing, asthma, hospitalization, just about everything, we're seeing pretty big gaps. There are a few exceptions, but not many. Okay, that means that it's a broad problem. And so when we talk about identifying causal mechanisms or causal pathways, we're not looking for one, we're probably looking for many. Identification of causal effects is really, really, really important. That came up earlier this morning. It's not enough to talk about correlation. You really have to establish causation in order to think about policy implications, and that can be very challenging to do. It also seems to be the case that intergenerational mobility differs across time, so what I'm telling you about this particular time period may not be true 5 years from now. It seems to depend on where you're at in the distribution, so the mobility, intergenerational mobility at the top and the bottom of the distribution is not the same, and that's going to mean that we're going to need to have a very broad approach as well. The other thing that I want to leave you with is that the ways that we structure social policy, deliver it, and pay for it all have implications for intergenerational mobility. Right? So we're having a big debate in the moment about how to support young people in Australia who basically are attending university. There's been an effort to kind of target those resources more towards young people who are disadvantaged people. But the payoff for that, in order to keep it budget neutral, has been to try to tighten up on young people whose families do appear to have the ability to support them by making it more challenging for them to actually access student benefits. Okay, now that all sounds very sensible, except that basically what you're doing is you're sort of pushing parental responsibility for young people. Now, I don't know when you think financial responsibility ends, but I'm here to tell you it is not 18 and probably closer to 25 and maybe 30, I don't know. But the more that we push young people onto their families, the more you have to be intensifying this intergenerational transmission, right? If young people became independent in their own right at age 16, then had access to benefits, entitlements on their own right at that age, and were less dependent on family support, then it wouldn't matter so much whether your family had this money to support you or not. Okay? And that's just one way. The way you think about private public schools or hospitals or all kinds of other things really has big implications for intergenerational mobility. And I'll stop there so we can have questions if you want.
The powerful influence between mothers and their children, is it the same between mothers and daughters and mothers and their sons, or have you got?
It actually, in this case, it is, right? We did look for that, and we did not find any, it doesn't appear to be any different, right? Although there's plenty of literature that says in other domains it is, so we did check for that. But in this particular case, we didn't see that. So let me just say, on the values thing, I mean, we were very careful to try to account for all of the ways that kids' attitudes about work and welfare would be influenced. So what we did is we also accounted for mother's welfare history, mother's work history, and mother's attitudes about work and welfare. And basically our model was, well, kids are learning what you tell them, but they're also learning by watching what you do. And so we attempted to account for all of those things and still found very large effects of welfare history.